right, now if you're just joining us, because we are live streaming, we might have to ask our guests from time to time to hit refresh on their live stream. I'm sure all of you working remotely for the last 7-8 months can identify with that. All right, what I want to tell you about next is a couple of panels that are coming up. We have a thought leadership panel coming up called About Changing of the Guard. And that's where we've got analysts. Wang from Constellation Research joins us, as well as James Governor of RedMonk, influencer Yves Mulkers of 7W Data, and syndicated radio host Eric Kavanagh. The next panel is a customer panel, really focused on using data to run a company. 3 of SingleStore's customers are joining us with this one. Palo Alto Networks, its SVP of Prisma Cloud, Varun Badwar. The CTO and co-founder of IEX Cloud, Josh Blackburn. And from EOG Resources, its SVP, CIO, and CTO, Sandeep Bakri.
Thanks, Lisa, and hello, everyone. This is Dave Vellante, and welcome to this power panel. As Lisa said, the title of this session is Changing of the Guards, Data Trends of the Future. We can go a lot of places with that one. And the really good news is we got great guests, 4 great guests, as Lisa mentioned. Wang, the founder and chairman and super analyst of Constellation Research, Eric Kavanagh, co-founder of the Bloor Group, and he's also a syndicated radio host and the strategic CDO. I got some questions around that, Eric. And James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, Yves Mulkers, industry analyst, 7W Data practitioner. Guys, great to see you again. Really appreciate it.
Great, thanks for having us.
Great. So, you guys, you all have been, innovating in an industry. It's highly entrenched. The stodgy analyst media industry. You guys have made it fun and interesting. And I got to say, I miss you guys. Seeing you guys face to face. So, Ray, let me start with you. So much to talk about. I want to start with the state of data today. Database used to be such a boring market. It's anything but now. I mean, how do you think about the data landscape? How it's evolved? Welcome, my friend.
Dave, I miss you. I miss hanging out, watching you guys do the whole show, do everything out there. The data space is amazing. This is the biggest shift of innovation that's going on. We're like, oh, we'll just put it in the cloud, everything will be fine. No, right? It is. Data's coming in from all places. Data's coming in from all different styles. What's actually happening with the data? We're competing on this concept called decision velocity. Machines make decisions 100 times per second. We make a decision per second, and oh my God, we gotta wait 2 weeks for management committee to get out, right? And so how do I get the data? How do I become more insightful? Post-pandemic, what happened? Oh my God, we actually started the day with data and analytics and insights and forecasts and plans. We used to do that retrospectively. People get in a meeting, oh yeah, what's your report look like? Hey, what does your report look like? Now we're just like, we start everything with it. It's a data-driven approach.
Yeah, so I mean, Eric, thank you, Ray. The D in your strategic CDO, is that data or digital? I mean, as Ray was mentioning, we start every day with data. If data is digital, or is that both for your title?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So it is both indeed. In fact, we had a great CDO, Chief Digital Officer from Cognizant on last week who was just brilliant and was walking us through some of the ways they roll out industry solutions. But you bring up an excellent point, right? Which is CDO, is it data, is it digital? It is both. And I think the key to remember here is that data just enables processes, right? So Chief Digital Officer often really focuses on that transformation, on reinventing the business. And we're right now in the middle of a massive transformation that is industry-wide, it's global, and data obviously is a critical component to that. But let's never forget that process is king, right? Process makes perfect. And the more we can use data to inform processes, and as Ray said, to automate some of these decisions that get made, the better off we're all going to be.
Well, when you mentioned process, but what's interesting is that, Eric, a lot of the processes that we're doing today, we've never seen before. We're kind of making them up as we go along. So you've got to be agile and be able to deal with that. I think it's a topic that we might be able to dig into. Any initial thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think with process mining, which to my mind is one of the hottest topics on the planet right now, with process mining, we can see what's been happening all along, right? For years, we relied on the big box vendors to tell us what's going on, and they had various windows into reality. But now with process mining, we can actually see, we can track the data footprints. I love that concept, and really focus on optimizing these processes. And that's across platforms. So that's why something like cloud native becomes so important these days, because the faster you can get to the action, the faster you can get to the decision, the faster the decision can make some benefit to the company happen. That's the key in my mind, right? So data is always going to be key. It's always going to be the foundation, but it's moving very quickly these days. And we need to remember that that movement should not be stopped, right? That's the other big change that I see is persistence versus in motion, right? Data in motion is really what's creating so many of the big opportunities these days. But nonetheless, we have to understand what that process is, where it intersects with data, and what that all means.
Thanks for that, Eric. James, let's go to you. First of all, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you very much. All things considered.
So, in 2010, I was at Hadoop World with John Furrier, and he said something to me on theCUBE that resonated, and I wonder if I get your comments, that the data was the new development kit. And you've written about and talked a lot about data in the context of application development. What's the developer community perspective on the data trends, and how do they and you look at this as a practitioner?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've been on obviously a massive transition in a number of different ways over the past 10 to 15 years. And I think some of that just comes from abundance. Previously, everything that we did from a data perspective was about limited resources. And of course, with the cloud and open source, we became unconstrained with the kinds of things that we could do. I mean, arguably, this was all actually kicked off by, if we think of YouTube and the things they did at scale, where we could never have done anything like that if we were trying to run on an Oracle database. So we've been in this long sort of transition. And I think developers, one of the big things, because of this abundance, no longer need to ask for permission anymore. So if they've got a problem that they want to solve, they're able to do that with just a huge amount of resources without asking for permission, which really creates new opportunities in terms of the things they can do. We then look at the companies that we admire, the companies that we're kind of looking at in terms of interesting things that they can do. And I think, for me, and in fact, the last speaker where it was like, well, let's look at Google searches. I think sometimes it's the false positives that can be very, very interesting, where we're in a world where we're literally storing everything. So if something doesn't work, that could teach us just as much as something that does work. And I think, yeah, to your point, look, developers, certainly in the age of AWS and the public cloud, are become very used to this level of resources and being able to do things that they couldn't before. And yeah, data is at the heart of any modern application development.
Thank you, James. And Yves, let's bring you into the conversation. You and I met in the early days of the sort of big data meme. You've been a practitioner, since the time I met you. Let's talk about how you've seen this space evolve. We heard today about the need for simplification, bringing compute to the data, which is something that we first heard about in the early days of Hadoop. But how have things evolved? What are the critical aspects of that evolution that people should be thinking about from your perspective?
Well, what I saw, back in the days, we needed a lot of knowledge about how you tweak your queries, how you store your data, where to store it, gather it all together was such a complex thing. What we see happening is that virtualization, that simplification as from the layers, like you say, Dave, and this helps you in innovating with data as well. It becomes more easy to capture data of your systems, of your processes. It has been addressed in a more agile way. And bringing that together helps you in really becoming data-driven. If I think back in the days when you were analyzing processes, we always talked about facts and figures. You need to have the numbers. And now with let's still call it digital transformation, where you transfer your processes into a digital asset, which we now call data, helps you in really looking at how your processes perform. But having that flexibility and not really making the choice upfront, like has been mentioned, an Oracle database, for example, and then after a while seeing that that is not fit for what you are trying to achieve, to store your data or manipulate your data, that becomes such a big advantage of working with the data.
Where do you guys land on the spectrum of cloud purity? In other words, is this cloud, public cloud, or is it a reality that we can actually extend it to have the same experience on premises, across clouds? Now we're talking about the edge. Ray, how do customers look at that?
Right now they're just trying to get all their data into one spot, right? That's the very basics, and it's coming all over the place. It could be coming from the edge. It could be coming from a feed. You're getting a weather feed that you have no idea what it's going to be like, right? And you've got siloed systems that you're just trying to connect. So that's basic level. Is just even get an inventory of what's going on with your data. Most people don't have that. The next step really is thinking about, okay, all these hybrid stores, all what's happening on the edge. How do we bring this? And so that actually is a little bit different. And, when Eric was talking about process, he's completely right. And think about business processes, but also think about the question you want to ask. Like, what business question are you trying to answer? And then we can figure all this stuff out later, right? So I want to answer a question. Now I got to figure out where the data exists. Then I got to figure out which processes does it fit back to. And then I can figure out what approvals do I need? How do I take that data? And then how does that get consumed, right? So we've got to go back and think about that. And then we can figure out, okay, this is a cloud source. This is a hybrid source. This is something that never, ever leaves the system because it's in Europe or it's in a country that we have to worry about, data sovereignty. Then we can actually start doing all this. But we haven't done the business problem. We haven't figured that out yet. And everybody's like, oh my God, the data's all over the place. We got to figure this out. I'm like, solve your business problem first. Then we can figure out how you want to go to architect it.
Well, that's interesting. And again, back to James, from a developer perspective, I've seen some of your talks where you've really simplified the sort of the world of developers. It's all APIs, and to Ray's point, I guess, Ray, I'm inferring, leave the data where it is, figure out the business problem, and deal with the governance that way. But James, I wonder if you could sort of weigh in on this topic.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in terms of your question about the spectrum. I may indeed be on the spectrum myself, but I think that
we all are.
we have seen, I would say, a convergence of some things that to me is really interesting because, from an industry perspective, a lot of question about hybrid cloud, then a question about multi-cloud. And I think increasingly we're moving towards a more sort of middleware approach where hybrid cloud and multi-cloud become the same thing. From a customer perspective, and I'll get to the developers in a minute, from a customer perspective, they really want to be able to think to themselves, look, I want a managed environment. And the most important thing is that I can have a managed environment that I can use that frankly offers me the kinds of benefits that I expect from what I've learned in using the cloud. I mean, just think about administrators and the huge amount of resources we used to be applying into things like DBAs or network managers and so on. So we're thinking about a managed model, and I think that we're definitely moving towards a space where, as I say, those boundaries are broken down, but managed services is really the most compelling way that developers are now building systems. So managed services is APIs that are composite that they can take advantage of. Increasingly, that's the sort of model. In fact, I thought it was interesting hearing about this global store notion that SingleStore is talking about, because that's what we want. We do not want to be having to manage all of that. We want a platform that will manage that for us. As Ray says, we're going to have data governance and everything else. That's stuff that developers don't want to worry about. They want to be productive. They want simple, effective APIs so that they can access the data that, as I say, is on a managed platform.
Eric and Yves, I wonder if you could weigh in on something just from a customer perspective. It's interesting what you're saying about global store and single store. That name, that metaphor, is pretty powerful. But when you talk to customers, they're trying to put data at the core of their business, and they've got all these different processes. Eric, you were talking about processes before, but they've got a life cycle. They got to ingest the data. They got to clean the data. They got to tag it, metadata, analyze it, prep it, visualize it, present it to the business for self-serve. And that's a fairly complicated matter. And they got a zillion different tools in the cloud. How do you look at that in terms of really trying to reduce the end-to-end elapsed time that it takes to go from data to insights. What are the challenges there, and what are customers doing?
That's a great question, and there are tons and tons of challenges, but I think the key to remember with all of these different technological waves that we see is creating layers of abstraction, right? When you hear about a single pane of glass, for example, that should show everything a particular user cares about at the moment, you want to abstract away whatever complexity isn't being tackled by the individual. Now, there's going to be someone managing the Kubernetes instance. That's pretty complicated stuff. No one else should care about that, really, a handful of people. But in terms of business users being able to get from source to target in their mind, for example, you want them to have whatever information they need at whatever time, and increasingly that's going to be real time, right? But I think one other key to throw out here just is the whole importance of perspective. Right? If you lose perspective, that's when you get off track. And to maintain perspective, let's just think about this for a second. You have to know who you are and where you are, and frankly, where you've been. And that's called historical data. Right? I think all too often companies forget about historical data. We're all excited about now and real time and predictive analytics and what's coming and where we're going. But you can't calculate velocity unless you know where you've been and how long it took to get here right now. So to me, what's really exciting about all this stuff is that you've got the edge, which is like the horizon, and the horizon is expanding. It's getting wider, if you will, in this metaphor. But where you are, that's who your DNA is, quite frankly, and that's your historical data. It's your organizational DNA. It's who you are. It's what you're trying to accomplish in the world, and that's all about information strategy, it seems to me. So I think that the key to be able to do what you just suggested is not lose the forest for the trees. You've got to maintain perspective, know who you are, where you've come from, where you're going, and in that situation, you're going to be just fine.
So thank you. Yves, isn't there as well sort of a collaboration problem where perhaps the teams aren't working together as a well-oiled machine, data engineers, data scientists, guys who are doing visualization? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. What I see mostly in architectures of if you're landing at the company, you see either having the traditional teams, the data warehouse and business intelligence teams. Then you have somebody who looks at analytics and the machine learning models. And those are all separated teams. They're not really involved with the people programming the applications as well. So and in architectural designs as well, you still see how they have separate approaches for the different type of loads, what they have to manage. Still a big problem, but it's not only an IT or data related problem. I still see that happening as well in marketing and sales, where these different departments are not aligned with each other. But what I see with solutions like SingleStore, that helps in blending those teams. And what I see when I talk to the practitioners themselves, they see that we have a big overlap of the type of jobs what we do. So that helps in bringing the team together. But now it needs to come up to the board level where they understand that a lot of the preparation work, 80% of your work is the same. Either you're doing your traditional data preparation or you do that for building artificial intelligence or just data science models. So that's something what I see happening, but there is still a lot of awareness that needs to happen on bringing that to the attention of the board level, of bringing those teams together and pulling them all the skill sets together. I mean, I've been there coming from traditional dimensional modeling stuff and then trying to understand what is big data, what is data science. And then you're kind of surprised that you have so much overlap and it's only the part of the pure modeling and then modeling really for data science, because you do the traditional modeling as well for building data warehouses and dimensional modeling. But on the one hand, you do that from a personal perspective and understanding the business. And in data science, you do that more from the algorithms, what you are applying to your data.
So I do want to ask you guys, thank you, Yves. I do want to ask you guys about some of the architectural, choices, the philosophies, this kind of religion in databases there are in many, areas of the tech stack. And I'm going to ask Raj about this later on too. But you basically got, this, again, the spectrum of philosophies. You've certainly got different pricing models, cloud's bringing that in, but you've got the purpose-built, sort of really focused, database. And then there's obviously a trend in a sort of all-in-one, bringing in transaction and analytic and GraphDB, a JSON, streaming, et cetera. And these things are, as I say, these are big decisions, and they're driving valuations, they're driving customer bets. How do you guys, think about that? Maybe Ray, you can start us off again here.
I think the biggest challenge here is you have to understand what you're trying to do with your data, and you can choose a style, right? The traditional relational database can handle everything is gone. We've thrown that out the window. We started figuring out what happens when data is in motion. We're starting to figure out what's going on with edge. All those things has actually created these shifts, right? But before that, we thought everything was going to be happening in one spot and it was going to be okay, but that's no longer possible. And I think that's really the big shift that we've seen. I'm not wedded to a certain style. I feel like we're coming back full circle. We do this all the time. Cloud, oh, it's really mainframe time sharing. Big data, right? It's key value stores. Look, this is a VT100, right? So I think we're going to come back the whole thing again and then find different kind of approaches.
Well, so I wondered, James, if you could weigh in on this. So I heard it was the John Nicastro from SiriusXM. He said he cares about latency, data deduplication, cost optimization, and simplifying the stack. I mean, can one database do all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Raj may have some thoughts on whether one database can do that. I know that.
You can choose wisely.
But, we're in an environment where obviously those things matter. We're doing things at scale. We're dealing with massive data volumes. I mean, we've heard customers this morning, and they're just doing huge amounts of data that they're ingesting, huge number of events. And then whether you're running transactions or whether you're running analytics across that, performance is just absolutely critical. There is no doubt about that. And whether or not it's sort of holy grail stuff, what we do look for are providers that are going to be able to either deal with the trade-offs or provide us a number of those things. And certainly low latency is just an expectation now. When we look at the sorts of scale that people have been looking at. I think Ray's right. It's been interesting. We're in the midst of a SQL resurgence at the moment. Having sort of said that relational is bad, everyone is turning around and saying actually relational is good. Why do we mess around with all that Hadoop stuff when we could have just done it in a relational database? So SQL's back. I'm seeing a lot of innovation there, and that's definitely a space. So SQL-based data access, geographically distributed databases at scale, that is just a very hot area at the moment. And yeah, I think customers are making decisions that do basically, those are the things they're looking for, and frankly, those are the expectations they have, given the sort of progress we've made as an industry.
I remember it must have been probably around 7 or 8 years ago. Amar Awadallah told me that he said SQL was the killer app for Hadoop, and so it's coming back around. So, Eric, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about digital. We're at 22 minutes in. We haven't talked much about digital transformation, and we haven't said the COVID word yet, although James kind of alluded to it.
It's passé. Nobody cares.
But yeah, right. So, but the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And of course, COVID broke everything. But I sensed, Eric, a lot of complacency kind of leading up to 2020. People like, digital transformation, it's a buzzword. Not on my watch. Our bank's doing really well. And then all of a sudden, if you're not digital, you're out of business. But I had another CIO tell me a couple of weeks ago. I said, "What's digital transformation to you?" He said, "My ERP system's 15 years old. I got to upgrade it. That's digital transformation to me." So, what are you seeing in the digital space?
So another CDO that we had on the show just recently was from a healthcare organization. He said that because of COVID, they tackled 5 years of digital transformation roadmap projects in 6 months. So there's no doubt that COVID was a forcing function. It forced all of us to change. Now, some of us have worked from home for years, so it wasn't that big of a transformation. But I think that the bottom line is that We are now in this fully digitized world, even though I'm a big fan of analog, just to be clear. Voice is analog. The reality of the world around us is analog, quite frankly. I think we'll get back around to that sooner or later. But the fact is that you have to transform, right? Necessity remains the mother of invention. And I think we have seen tremendous things get done. Because you think about what holds back digital transformation. Old habits die hard. People don't want to add some new workflow. They're just scratching through their day as it is. But if you're forced to do something, human beings are tremendously creative. And now with the plethora of solutions that we have out there for data management, for data processing, the cloud, of course, is now this new marshaling area. And I was joking about that comment earlier about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. We talked hybrid cloud for like 2 weeks and then it just became multi-cloud. And I do think that the cloud is going to reach into on-prem data centers too. I think that's already happening, quite frankly, because what we want is the ability to move from environment to environment. And that's frankly what cloud native is all about. So I think as cloud native matures and as we all understand what that means and as we all work towards that, and yes, Kubernetes is a big part of all that, but it's not the only part. Just standards are a critical part of that whole process. I think more and more because of COVID as the forcing function, we're going to see tremendous transformations in organizations that just had to do it to stay alive, to thrive. So to me, COVID has been a fantastic event in terms of forcing us all to get down to brass tacks and reinvent our businesses and reinvent ourselves as need be.
Yeah, thank you. And Yves, when you think about a framework for sort of how, if and when this thing ever comes back, is, I think about, okay, how much physical activity has to be involved in the business. Obviously, restaurants have to have some kind of physical activity. How essential is the business? How, can you be physically distanced? And of course, what's the level of data, centricity in your business? And you're seeing, virtually everybody trying to figure that out. Where do you land on this topic?
Well, there is still a big challenge what I see where we're so hot and hard into the data space. So for me, sometimes it is, you can't live without the data if you don't see it. I still see some traditional businesses that are able to handle their business without data. So that's sometimes a big frustration. I think on the other hand, it has been mentioned as well where you say the data needs to be available and you need to start from the business problem. So really understanding what type of problem you need to solve and then go and look for that data. Today I had an interesting discussion with somebody who's a transformation enthusiast, and I was really thinking through what is the difference between transformation and a digital transformation. And in fact, it's the ability and the need or the want from people to change, to be able to solve some problems. And that triggered me in a certain thing. Where do we sometimes have so big problems in implementing new approaches in data management? And that's why people are so used to do their stuff and it still works for them. And they don't think through that it takes 2 hours and you can do that in 2 minutes, because they don't know what you can do, what is out there as technology that can help you. And it takes them a lot of effort to do that first of all, that type of transformation in their mind. So it's a kind of change in the mindset, what needs to happen to adapt to those new technologies that can help. Not meaning to say that technology will solve everything, but it's a means to getting your help in getting better business processes and getting that for good, better life. That's really the takeaway for this.
Great, thanks for that, Yves. Hey, Ray, I wanted to ask you about software pricing. You're a software industry watcher. You spend a lot of time there. I'm even seeing now some of the infrastructure guys are, hey, we're as a service. You see HPE with their deal, and Dell just announced their big deal. I'm like, oh, the infrastructure guys are finally figuring out the cloud. So, but I've oftentimes, and any of us, Salesforce customers, they basically say, hey, look what the cost is per month, and then it's like, okay, pay up front and lock in for a year or 2 or 3 years. And that seems to be beginning to change a little bit. We're seeing some consumption-based pricing. And what are you seeing when you talk to your customers? How do they want? Do they want choice? Do they want just consumption-based? Do they want to have that sort of visibility and predictability? What's your take on that?
That is the best question you can possibly ask. I have to say this, and I love my customers, I love clients. Most clients are completely schizoid and bipolar about pricing. They're like, oh, we want it really simple, right? So then you give them like 3 choices, good, better, best. And then like, oh, no, my needs are different. So they're like, oh, can you do it differently? Like, can you like count like the number of people we'll have? Or can you count X, Y, and Z? And what's emergent is people really want elasticity, but they also want to know they're not getting ripped off, and they want simple pricing. And so what we tell people to do is think about a user-based metric, so how many people or how many devices. Think about a usage-based metric, maybe it's tied to revenue, maybe it's tied to some kind of production number, and then think about a platform metric for how you're consuming that platform. And that is a good way to start thinking about elasticity and designing that in your business model before you agree on pricing, because you don't want that pricing component to completely change how you price all your other components because it's a subcomponent of something bigger.
It's a really interesting topic, and one, I don't know if, does anybody else have an opinion on this? I don't want to stick you with a question that's kind of not in your wheelhouse, but I knew Ray would knock it out of the park. Anybody else have an opinion on this?
Yeah, it's the ultimate question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Eric, please.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the ultimate question, and you have to remember that there are 2 sides to every coin, right? No pun intended, since we're talking about money. But when you do as a service, that sounds great. What was the big joke when a few years ago after Amazon came out that the most ungoverned line in your IT budget was your Amazon bill, right? Because someone forgot to turn something off and it spiked. And so pay as you go sounds good until something spikes and you get unexpected costs, right? So it's interesting. There's going to be a constant tension between as a service type financing and good old fashioned enterprise pricing, which is how a lot of these big guys made so much money. I mean, how did Oracle and IBM and Microsoft and SAP accrue these mountains of cash? It's because they had all the cards back in the day. Well, that's all changed now. And we have a lot of, you saw what happened to SAP yesterday in the stock market. So this is a very turbulent time. And I think it's going to be a work in motion for a long time now to figure out how to price these things and how to deal with all this. But it's a moving target, and it will never not be a moving target.
James, go ahead. Weigh in, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question around pricing. So Google Cloud, and we had this idea that we're here in a world of pay-as-you-go services. Google Cloud has recently signed a number of 10-year deals. So Mayo Clinic, Sabre, Deutsche Bank. And so, I guess one of the first that the prestigious was perhaps the Jedi deal as well. We're looking at these massive, massive contracts that are designed to be transformational. They've included maybe, joint classroom learning, although with COVID, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But certainly we're living in an environment now where cloud companies are doing 10-year deals. And to my mind, it's a little bit like, wow, 1998 called and it wants his business model back.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess, so Raj is now joining us. Raj, CEO, I thank you for hopping in the call. You've heard our conversation here with our 4 panelists, and thank you for jumping in. So any thoughts you have on this conversation?
Oh, I was intrigued by all the conversation that is going on. So, I just wanted to hear more from the 4 distinguished guests that we have on this panel. I did take away a lot from this conversation, both with regard to the fact that, I don't think there would be one platform for all kinds of data. And I think that is very true. I think James made that statement. There would be edges in the market which will explore innovation and innovative ways of doing things. But majority of your data having to move across boundaries time and time again can be avoided. I mean, one of my favorite pastimes as a kid was to go work in the garage with my father, as in our home garage, on cars, just maintaining them. And now we've got a car where I woke up and I find a new car in the garage because it's a Tesla, which has gotten updated on software, and it just performs differently. So I do think that, the database industry will move from having to do the plumbing work at the database layer to be able to do more interesting data analytical work at the layer ahead. And providers like us or many others would, try and manage the complexity of the data for them. The other point that I really enjoyed was the pricing element of it. And I think, Ray, you're spot on. And this is how we lens it as well. There is a level of schizophrenia when consumers want to buy. Their initial response is, I want flexibility. Well, if it's flexibility, then there is a cost associated with it. If it's simplicity, then there is a inflexibility attached to it. And I love the way you said that, and I'm sure I wouldn't have paraphrased it right, but one was platform-based, the other was user-based, and the third was consumption-based. Did I get that right? Yeah, I think I'm seeing people nod.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think you got
do.
that right.
And that's exactly how we lens the world in terms of pricing. And the other bit is there is no room anymore for the age-old thing of tying in for multi-year contracts and upfront payment, etc. At least not initially. And the last point about the 10-year deals with a couple of companies that you mentioned, including Deutsche Bank, etc. We are seeing increasing numbers of those. So we are seeing a lot with GCP, we're seeing a lot with Azure, we're seeing a lot with AWS. But in all honesty, if you lens it that way, and it's just a thought. People used to spend money on Salesforce towers and naming buildings after themselves, etc., because that was a way of branding, and that's where most of your employees came and worked out of. Now, if you come to think of it, AWS, Azure, and GCP are the new buildings. That's where your employees go every morning and stay and remain. And how do you develop a ecosystem around that building, which is your Azure, AWS, or GCP, which allows them to be most responsive to your customer base, is the seminal challenge that our customers ask of us. And that's where the sort of the low latency, high concurrency SQL aspect of our technology is serving us well. I don't want to be self-serving in this discussion, but just my biased viewpoint as to how we are lensing the world.
Well, thanks for jumping in here, Raj. You and I have a one-on-one later. I can't wait. And but we're out of time. Guys, thanks so much for coming on this panel. Keep it right there, everybody. We got a great show for you, some awesome content coming up. So don't change the channel.